So it's my pleasure to introduce Jane Carnegie, who's known to many of you, and she's going to talk about not only how they saved Western Port, but the battles ahead. Thank you, Jane.
Well, thanks everyone for coming, as other speakers have said, and just listening to those speakers, I am actually quite amazed, and I think the thing about the progressives on the peninsula is that we can all actually learn from each other. I think Save Western Port did so many amazing things, but listening to the way in which some of these other campaigns have occurred, we certainly could have done with some of that input from the law firms that you mentioned and all that collaboration. But what I'd like to do now is really just share my thoughts about some of the key aspects of the campaign. I know many of you in the room were part of that campaign and you're really familiar with what it was all about. So I won't go into too much detail there. It's really just, in a sense, to share my thoughts as a member of the steering committee of Save Western Port on what I think were some of the key factors that led to the success. I've called my little presentation Empowering Communities and Creating Community Power, because I think that's what we're all doing here, and collectively we can in fact do so much more. So I think the key points that I really wanted to raise have been raised by some of the other speakers, and there's obviously a community of thought about what is important. I wanted to start with our steering committee because I think the steering committee is so important in helping to facilitate that huge community involvement that we had with the AGL campaign. And it's just so important in guiding the way in which we had to deal with so many of the different issues that we encountered. A great community steering committee, I think, is at its core built around collaboration, respect and cohesiveness. And we have to recognise that people coming onto a steering committee will have different strengths, and in that lies the power. If we were all the same, we wouldn't get anywhere, but we rely on and we build on particular strengths of the people that are in the steering committees. To all who've been part of the Save Western Port Steering Committee, I just give a big shout out. I think they are all amazing people. Coming out of that sort of work, I think the second and crucial element to building a successful campaign is the obvious one. It's about how we engage the community, how we create that catalyst for action. And at every opportunity, like the other campaigns you've heard about, we worked tirelessly to try and get that message out. We knew what was at stake, but for so many in the community, it was an unknown. And many in the community thought there was nothing really to see here. You know, we already had major fossil fuel companies on the peninsula in Western Port, and this was just another one. So we really had to get that message that this was just such a major threat to Western Port, its environment and its ecosystems. And we had to also change understanding about Western Port, often the poor cousin to Port Phillip Bay on the other side of our peninsula, and to recognise the extraordinary ecosystems that live and breathe in that bay. And of course the mangroves, the seagrasses and so forth that capture carbon all the time. So it's a mindset change about the bay on our doorstep. And so we did all the things that others have talked about to get that message through: social media, newsletters, flyers, local newspaper articles, magazine articles, community stalls, rallies, town hall meetings, including one here back in 2019, which we had over 500 people, and protests to try and get that message through. And from there, I think the next element in the success is that we scaled it up. We scaled it up, in a sense, beyond local community to try and get through to some of the key organisations, both around the state and regionally, that would come on board with the campaign. So whilst we sort of led the charge against AGL, we got many other organisations, both local and statewide, to come on board. And that builds power, that builds influence, and that builds recognition in government circles. Some, like Environment Victoria, were there from the very start, or almost the very start, and they played such a crucial role in working in partnership with SWP. And they used their knowledge, their guidance on campaigning to help us in what we were trying to do. So a big shout out to Environment Victoria. And then so many other groups came on board so that we ended up with what we called a really broad coalition or alliance of groups that in the end, when we were confronted with the EES hearings, we had over 10,000 submissions to the EES. It was the biggest in the state's history, and over 25 key organisations participated in the hearings and took out the time to have their say on what they thought was so wrong with this project. And many other individuals also in what is an extremely daunting process to participate in. Our own Mornington Peninsula Council, and I'm glad to see David here, came out, they listened to the community, and they came out in strong opposition to the project. And the work that they did in the hearings was just so important, I think, to the end success. The fourth point I wanted to talk about has also been talked about by others, and that is the resources component. So at our level, we had all these other organisations that had helped us, but we also needed volunteers. We needed so many people to come and help do all those amazing things that we were doing around the community. And there were so many volunteers, but there were also people that just emerged, in a sense, out of nowhere to do something because they wanted to be part of the campaign and to contribute in the best way that they could. So we had a young woman, Hannah Tira Marino, who organised the amazing paddle out, which many of you may have been involved in. We had the Surf Riders Association come out and stand on the steps of Parliament in wetsuits and surfboards while we had the media present to get across our message. And we had the Climate Angels, without any of our knowledge from, say, Western Port, simply come and appear on the mudflats at Crib Point and provide another really important media opportunity. And of course, with so many issues involved, the other key resource we needed was money. How can a community group, or even multiple community groups, compete against the money of a company like AGL? Well, we did, and we did so because we had an amazing fairy godmother who appeared when we needed her most. Penny Gebhardt from Silverleaf Gallery came forward, organised an online art auction in the height of COVID, and that auction was so successful it gave us the resources to be able to hire lawyers, because we didn't get them pro bono, and experts, although some of those were pro bono. It was amazing. And AGL in that process lost about $130 million, so that was a key success. Building political nous, which others have talked about, was also important. At the end of the day, the key determinant of this campaign was the government and what would it do in its decision making. It was the decision maker. AGL might have been our enemy, but the decision maker was the Victorian government. So we learnt a lot about how to ensure that part of our strategy was to work at that level. And then we had to learn to navigate the entire complex process of an EES, which is so daunting for so many. And try not to drown while we were doing this, to keep still waving, as I call it, because the campaign, not as long as Arthur's Seat, but was 3 really hard years of our lives. At the time when most of us were locked down as well. And so on to victory, as Paul Keating once said, this is the sweetest victory of them all. I think for many of us who threw our lives into this David and Goliath effort, this was such a sweet victory. It was a community victory, a victory for the many Davids and Davidas who participated in the process. So on to some of the other issues that we now confront. I really want to talk primarily about the coal to hydrogen project, which is around. Many of you may have heard of it, many of you may not. I won't go into it in detail now, but this is such a major threat if this gets any legs. It's using brown coal from the Latrobe Valley, turning it into hydrogen, producing more emissions than generating electricity to create that hydrogen, shipping it down here, turning it into a liquid form, and then sending it to Japan as clean energy. It is nothing clean about it for us. It is nothing green about it for us. It is an absolutely abominable notion. And I think hopefully, there were good signs with the federal budget that the federal level people are looking at green hydrogen, not blue or brown hydrogen, as we call this. But I ask everyone, if you've got half an environmental bone in your body, to use someone else's phrase, you have to get on board. And we have to defeat this now, not just sort of let it linger, defeat it now. Finally, on a positive note, after the AGL campaign, many of us got involved in what we thought was the way forward for Western Port, not in Western Port, but many regions, but Western Port in particular, and that was to build a strategic framework for Western Port, a positive approach so that we don't have to keep having these bloody battles, these fights. And so, again, organisations like EV, the VNPA, Save Western Port, the Phillip Island Conservation Society, and many of the other groups that are in this room have come together and tried to seek that way forward. And all we want, it's very simple, is a new strategic plan for Western Port, a collaborative management partnership with key agencies, the Boonwurrung and the community to manage that, and a dedicated fund to implement the plan and ensure the future of Western Port Bay. We obviously need the government to support this, and we've been working tirelessly to get that support. Many businesses and many individuals have come on board, and now 2 local councils have signed up, Bass and Cardinia, and we hope that Mornington Peninsula Council is on the cusp of doing so as well. With that council support, we can really build the strength of this concept. There are some postcards on the community table. If you haven't filled them out, please send a message to the government, to Ingrid Stitt, the Minister for the Environment, that you support this approach for Western Port Bay. Thank you.